Hey everyone, welcome back. In this video, we are going to get familiar with our cameras. So let's get started. All right, so here we are. Before we get started, I just want to say that I am not affiliated with any make, model, brand of any kind. Everything you see here has been purchased with my own money. So with that said, this here is the Sony Alpha 7R3. And like I said, the announcement video, we're not going to get into great detail because every camera manufacturer and model are different in how they lay out their buttons for the most part. And their menu systems are different as well, even within Sony and their midline, prosumers, entry levels. Like this, the systems are different in that the prosumer has more features in the menu system than, say, a entry-level camera. Every camera, doesn't matter whether it's a point and shoot to a large format professional camera that's $50,000, $70,000, they're all going to have an on-off either button or switch. Now, most of your prosumers, entry-level to prosumers to your large format professional cameras will have a switch. So for instance, here the on-off button or the on-off switch is right around the shutter release button. So once you turn the camera on, it will, so depending on whether you have a DSLR or a mirrorless, the difference is going to be when you turn the camera on, it automatically goes to the viewfinder and not your LCD screen. With the mirrorless camera, you have the option of doing one or the other. For me, I manually switch between the viewfinder and the LCD. The viewfinder has a sensor on it, so what it does is it shuts off until you put your eye up to it, and then it'll turn it on, but that actually drains more battery. So if you're on a mirrorless camera, just keep that in mind, that if you have your viewfinder on, that sensor is on continuously and it'll drain your battery. Okay, with that said, so that's the on-off, pretty self-explanatory. Next one is your shutter release button. Now, every shutter release button across all cameras are a two-phase, meaning when you press the button halfway down, it'll focus your camera, and then when you press it down all the way, it'll release the shutter mechanism and it'll take the picture. So right here, for instance, so I am pressing the shutter button halfway down. As you can see, these little green boxes jumping around. That's telling me that the camera is now in focus, and once I press the button, it will take the picture. Now right now, because I am in a very slow shutter speed, that's why it took so long. So once again, press the shutter button halfway down, it'll focus. All the way down, it'll take a picture. Next up is your mode dial, and now this is probably one of the more important dials on your camera, just because it changes how your camera behaves or what it does. So we'll start out with the auto, and on this camera, you can see that it's a green box with the word auto. On other cameras, it may be just a green box, or it may be a green A, or it may just say auto in white lettering. It just depends, and it varies from camera to camera. So just look at your user manual and it will explain what it looks like. So on the auto setting, everything on the camera is automatic. You can't change any of the settings. No shutter speed, you can't change the aperture, you can't change the ISO. Your quick function or your quick menu, it'll let you change your focusing mode. So you have two modes for focus. You have an automatic, or I'm sorry, you have a single shot and a continuous. And real quick, so The single shot is once you press the button halfway down, it will focus, it will lock. So if you move your camera, the focus is for the distance between whatever your subject is here. So if you go and try to take a picture of something else without letting this go to refocus, it'll be out of focus. Your continuous focus is just that. So if I change this to continuous, once I press the shutter halfway down, it will continuously focus. So now if I change directions, so right now it's locked on the camera and it's focusing on the camera, but it's continuously focusing. So if I change to another subject, it'll continuously focus on that. So it doesn't matter if you move or not, the subject will always be in focus. Okay, so your auto settings, as I was saying, you can't change anything on it. As far as shutter speed, aperture, your ISO, all that, the camera will take over. So that's a good point and a bad point in that you don't really have to worry about the camera settings. All you really have to worry about is your subject and taking a picture of it. On the flip side of that coin, if you're trying to be creative, for instance, doing what's called a backlighting or a silhouette shot, where your subject has a light behind it that is very strong, and when you take a picture from this side of your subject is going to be very dark, therefore it's called silhouette. If you're on automatic, if that's your creative thought, that's how you want to take the picture, your camera is not going to be able to do it. What it's thinking is your subject needs to be able to be seen, so it'll try to bring up the exposure where your subject can be seen, and then your background is going to be just completely blown out. It's going to be a white out. You're not going to see anything. So that's bad side of auto. Your program or your P, that is going to be more of a partially manual, partially auto setting. If you change your aperture, it will change, if you change your shutter speed, in this case, if you change your shutter speed, it'll change your aperture. Meaning the camera says, okay, I believe this to be the proper exposure. So if you say, okay, I need to change my shutter speed because the subject is moving, so I need a faster shutter speed to freeze the subject so it looks sharp, then it'll change your aperture to compensate. So what happens is, and I'm going to make an exposure video coming up, that's going to be next, and I'll have more detail in this, so don't worry too much about this now, but just to explain the settings as how the camera is changing, what it does is the slower the shutter speed, the more light that comes in, and then it makes your whole exposure brighter. So the camera's saying, okay, it's too bright, I need to take the f-stop and make it darker. So basically so we'll say here, so at 1/30th of a second at f.35, f3.5, the camera says this is a proper exposure. Well, you're at a 1/30th of a second and you need a faster shutter speed. Well, that's going to decrease the amount of light that's coming in. So to compensate, the camera goes from 3.5 to f2.8 and making the iris larger to let more light in. And like I said, that's going to be a whole separate video coming up, but just so you understand how the camera changes the settings around. And that's where it's partially auto, partially manual. Now the next two, which is your aperture priority and your shutter priority, are pretty much the same as far as in how the camera changes the setting, with the one exception is your aperture will stay constant no matter what. So that's what aperture priority means. Now in most cameras, it'll have this A as aperture priority. And I was a Canon shooter before I switched to Sony. Theirs is a little bit different. Theirs will say AV as in aperture value, and their shutter speed priority is TV, which is time value, which your shutter speed controls the amount of time your shutter curtain stays open. So that's the only exception that I know of. If you know of any other cameras that have different labeling on there, just put it on the comments below. Let me know. I would greatly appreciate it. All right, so back to aperture priority. So as I change the aperture, say I need a large depth of field, I need everything to be in focus. So the higher the number, the more in focus you have. Well, the camera will compensate and say, okay, because of the iris being closed down, there's less light coming in. So I need to decrease the shutter speed so that the time allotment for the shutter speed will be longer to let more light in. And then on the opposite side of that is the shutter speed priority, or in Canon's case will be time value. TV is what you'll see on here. Now that's just the opposite, or I should say the shutter speed now is the priority. So if you have fast moving subjects, you increase your shutter speed, so you freeze the action, and then it'll change the f-stop, or the iris will open up as large as it can to compensate for the decreased light that's coming in. As you can see here, now it is, I'm using my iPhone as a secondary camera, so I can actually see what the camera is seeing, making sure that I am in frame. But as you can see here, the shutter speed is, the aperture is blinking. Now what that's saying is it's still too dark and I can't open the aperture anymore. That's, for this lens, that is the largest that the aperture or the iris will open. So that's telling me that's it. It's too dark. There's nothing else I can do. So I either need to increase the sensitivity to my sensor, which is the ISO, or I need to decrease the shutter speed. So like I said, that's exposure. That's another video, but just so you understand how the camera is shifting the settings or reprioritizing the settings for each individual, the shutter speed, aperture, and the ISO. Next up, you have the full manual, and this is where you are in complete control of your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. Now this will come with experience, so don't be alarmed, don't be afraid to experiment with your full manual. And as we keep going with this journey into being better photographers, like we will have some practice where you'll be able to be confident and comfortable using full manual. But as you can see, when I change the aperture, nothing else changes. If I change the shutter speed, nothing else changes. So that's what the full manual is. I have complete control. Therefore, if I want to be creative, like in the shot where I was saying in the auto, where you have your individual, your subject, and you have a backlight. When you take a picture, you can actually get that front of that person dark as a silhouette, and be able to capture that creative vision that you have. And that's the best part about being in full manual mode. You can capture your creative vision. Now on the other end of the spectrum on that, you do have to worry about your settings, and it's more not taxing, but it's more, you have to think of a lot more than just being creative. So now you have to consider the technical part of the camera in order to capture your creative vision. Okay. This particular camera has 3 memory recalls. Now, a memory recall is basically, I can take the settings and format and everything in the camera, and I can change it and then save it to a specific recall number. So here I have 3. So my first recall here is for what I have is a video setting. So I like to do a lot of nature and wildlife. So I'll take pictures, and then for instance, if I want to quickly take a video of something that I see, all I have to do is just switch to memory recall 1, and now I have my video settings, and then I can just take a quick video. The only downside with that is because the camera is not on the video record mode, I won't have any sound, and that's a drawback, and I don't know why that is. That's something that the engineers came up with, and just have to have a discussion and see why you can't have sound in that point. But later on in post, I can just I'll put it in the editing suite, and then I can put in my own sound effects and everything else. But back to the point of memory recall is being able to switch from landscapes. Say I'm doing nature or landscape, where that's actually I have on number 3, where I have a deep depth of field at an f11 and then 125th of a second. So basically just a typical landscape setting, and then I see an eagle trying to swoop down to catch its breakfast on a lake, then I have memory recall 2 set for wildlife. And then with the settings for that, I have a very fast shutter speed, a very wide open aperture, and then in this case I actually have it set to auto ISO, so it will, the camera itself will kind of compensate for whatever lighting there is, and then make sure that it's properly exposed. So those are your memory recalls. Not all cameras will have it. I know I have a entry-level mirrorless that does not have it. Then I have a kind of midline mirrorless camera that has 2 recall settings on it. And then of course this is more the prosumer, it's got 3. I've never had or been able to play with a professional large format camera, so I'm not quite sure if they have memory recalls. If anybody knows, again, just drop it in the comments, let me know. I'm actually curious. I've never been able to afford to rent or obviously buy a $50,000, $70,000 camera, so yeah, that'd be great, let me know. Okay, and then as I was saying, then you have your video record mode on there. That's a tongue twister. And that one, you can take video, and at the same time it opens up or it allows for sound capture, right? So now it's in a video dedicated mode where it's all about video and not necessarily still pictures. This is a whole other lesson. There are similarities to photography and videography, and there are also a lot of differences. So just know that a lot of your cameras, even your point and shoots, will actually have a video mode, so you can take video of, you know, maybe a birthday party or some kind of event, or, you know, anything that you want to take a video of. So it'll kind of look like a little film strip on there. You should be able to see it. It'll look like a little film strip. Now, not all cameras will have this. I know even my midline DSLR does not have this. So more of your prosumers and maybe your professional cameras. So this is S&Q, and what that means is slow and quick. Now, to make slow motion, and this is more for video, or this is for video. It's a secondary video mode. So in the slow motion, the more frames you have, the smoother your slow motion will be. So your 60, 120, 240, so on and so forth, you'll be able to slow it down, and it'll be a smooth rendering, basically. On the opposite side, your quick, you're actually going to capture 1 to roughly 3 frames per second, and then you're going to speed it up. So in the quick mode would be like your time lapses. It kind of looks, I don't want to say choppy, but you can see the difference in each frame. So that's what a quick is. Quick mode is time lapse type thing. All right, so that's your dial mode. Most cameras will have custom buttons. My entry level, I don't believe had it. My mid kind of level camera had 2 custom buttons, and then this prosumer actually has 4 custom buttons, and they're labeled here as C1, C2, and then I have C3 and then C4 on here. Now with those, I can pretty much put into whatever I want. Okay, so for instance, and this has to be done within the main menu. You'll have well, just real quick. So right here where it says custom key, so kind of the landscape picture that tells me that I'm setting up the custom buttons for my stills kind of mode in the camera. And then as you can see here, the control wheel, I have nothing set. Custom button 1, which is C1, I have for silent shooting. Now this camera is able to take pictures without any of the kind of that click that you hear when the shutter goes off. My custom 2 button I have for live view display effects. So the great thing with a mirrorless camera is with what you see on your screen is what you get. So if your exposure is too dark, you'll see it on your screen. If your exposure is too bright, once again, you'll see it on the screen. With your DSLRs, through the viewfinder, you won't be able to see it because the light comes in through the lens and then it goes through 2 different mirrors to bounce what the lens is seeing so you can see through the viewfinder. With a mirrorless, the viewfinder is actually electronic. So there's nothing between the sensor and the lens. So therefore, I can see exactly what the camera is seeing. On a DSLR, you can do the same, but you actually have to turn on your live view. Now, every camera is different on how you do that. Some you actually have to go into the main menu system. Others you might have a quick, kind of a quick function, quick menu thing where you can select it on there. But when you turn on your live view for your on your DSLR, you'll be able to do the same. You'll be able to see as far as whether your exposure is too dark or too bright. But back to the custom buttons, on custom button 2, I can actually turn off the effect where it's kind of useless, but as you can see right now, it says the effect is off. So if I change settings, you can see that nothing happens on the live view. But once I turn the setting back on, you can see now it is completely dark. And as I change my settings, so that's what I love about a mirrorless is it's constantly on unless I turn it off. But the effect, what I see is what I get, and I absolutely love that. Custom button 3 is a magnifier. And what that is if I use it more for landscapes to make sure that distant objects are in focus. So I can magnify. Let's see if we can do it here. You can see. As you can see, once I press the C3 button once, and it gives me an orange box of that is what is going to be magnified, so I can see if it's in focus. So I press it one more time, and it's magnified by 6.2 times. And then I can make sure it's focused. I press the button again and magnifies it to 12. And then back to normal, and now I know that it is in focus. So that's what I use the magnify option for, is to make sure that when I focus something, that it is in focus. And the reason I use that is when I am shooting landscapes, I'm actually on manual focus and not autofocus. And the reason being is that, especially if I'm doing panoramas, I don't want the camera to keep focusing or refocusing on different areas. So as I shoot the panorama, every time you press the button halfway, as I showed you before, it focuses. Well, I don't want to do that. I want it to lock focus, and then in that same plane, as I take the panorama, it keeps the focus locked and it won't change focus. So that way later on, when I stitch all those pictures together, they're all equally in focus, rather than one's in focus, one's out of focus, and that kind of thing. All right, those are the custom buttons. On here, so not all cameras will have it. Mostly your entry level up to your prosumers. Not quite sure about your point and shoots, but it will have this. On here is, so on here it's FN or function. It's a quick menu. If I remember correctly, the Canon has a Q on it, and it's basically a quick menu. And as you can see here, it gives you the drive mode. So whether you have, when you press the shutter, it's a single shot, continuous shot, you have your self timers and that kind of thing. And then this is the focus mode. So basically everything that you can do in the main menu system, instead of having to go through, and as I showed you earlier, there is a lot of pages, and then within those pages, then you have a lot of things to scroll through. It's in your most used functions will be in that quick menu selection. So I highly suggest that you go through your manual or YouTube or whatever for your particular camera, because the more familiar you are with your camera, when you go out shooting, the technical part is out of the way, and it comes second nature, and you can focus more on your creative, artistic vision of what you want to capture. So with that said, that is your most common buttons and features on just about all the cameras out there. If there are any questions, put them in the comments below. I will respond as soon as I can. If it's a common question, then what I'll do is I'll just make another video on what that question is. But once again, thank you so much for staying with me here. Subscribe, hit that notification bell. That way when the next video drops, you will be notified. And until then, see you soon.